So welcome back to the channel, and in today's video I'm talking about why in certain circumstances it's okay for a fashion designer to copy someone else's work. But before I continue, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Fashion Roadman for all your fashion news. So what inspired me to actually make this video was I was reading this book called Vogue on Balenciaga. So I've just been reading about Balenciaga in general, and I read this part in the book that made me want to kind of look into like why designers have copied other designers in the past and if it's okay for fashion designers to copy other people's work. So I'm going to read out, it's quite long, but it is the basis for this video, so I think it's really important I read it out. So yeah, I'm just going to read it out. And it's talking about Cristobal Balenciaga, by the way. His friendship with Chanel, his elder by 12 years, was to last, with one major blip until her death in 1971. It was built on his admiration for her work and later hers for his. Chanel took all the chi-chi and fuss out of women's clothes, he told Glynn. He himself eventually went further than she did, paring clothes to their essence. He learnt a great deal from Chanel. When he opened his first couture business, he bought many of her designs to copy and adapt for his clients. This was the accepted practice of the time. Fashionable women wanted French chic, and dressmakers in other cities were obliged to take their lead from Paris. The young Balenciaga continued his trips to Paris and bought from other couturiers such as Worth, Cherie, and Molinet. But he particularly admired three women designers, Chanel, Louis Boulanger, and the great Madeleine Vionnet. He bought mostly from these three, taking the clothes apart to see how they were made. At the same time, he was also working on his own designs. Vionnet, who dismissed Chanel as that hat maker, immediately recognized him as the real thing. When she had the chance to see his own work in the early 20s, she asked why he bothered to copy her clothes since his own was so beautiful, and encouraged him to set up his own fashion house. Now, what do we learn from that? In the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, couturiers kind of saw it as kind of something that's flattering when you copied their work. It was kind of a sign that they had reached a certain height, that other people had started to copy them. And it was almost like they admired designers that they thought were good who copied them. And it's to the point where when Balenciaga was copying Vionnet, she was kind of the inspiration for him really trying hard and starting his own house, because she was like, why are you copying me? You're like the real deal. You're so good. I've seen like the work that you do by yourself. Why don't you just focus on that instead of copying my designs? And this made me go into what I think current designers think about this. So I have a Yohji Yamamoto quote that's quite popular. And what he said was, copy, 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 copy. At the end of the copy, you will find yourself. And when Yohji Yamamoto says this, he doesn't mean to copy things blindly, which is where I think people get it wrong. I think it's more about copying artists you admire, but then go further and ask questions. Dive deeper into the decisions they make, why they make certain choices, why they design things a certain way. And that's exactly what Cristobal Balenciaga used to do, because he used to make his own work at the same time he was copying these designers. And what he would do, he, like we said, he would buy work of Molinet, or he would buy work of, Cherie, or people like Vionnet. And he would break these dresses down and look at the pattern and look at how it's constructed, and then go back to his own work and then put some elements that he liked in it. And it was almost like it came from Cristobal Balenciaga having an understanding of the garment construction of a lot of these great couturiers that he could work on and improve and ultimately make his own design. To go further into this idea, in the 19th century, there was a very famous English writer and journalist called W.H. Davenport Adams. And he said something similar when he was trying to describe the genius of Alfred Tennyson, who was a great poet at the time. And what he said was, great poets imitate and improve, whereas small ones steal and spoil. And him praising Alfred in this way, it comes from him trying to say that, if you have an understanding of something, that you're copying, then eventually it's inevitable that you will take cues from it and make your own thing. Whereas if you, he said, whereas small ones steal and spoil. So when you just steal something blindly without any understanding of all the context of whatever you're stealing, you're not really going to you're not going to ask questions like, okay, what was the person thinking when they made this? How did they relate their culture to this collection? How could I do that in my collection? And if we talk about current designers, there are definitely many designers that we can talk about in this way. A good example, for starters, is Demna Gvasalia. Demna Gvasalia is a designer that worked under Margiela. He's very open about how obsessed he is with Margiela. And his earlier work, especially for Vetements, people have gone as far as to say it's just an outright Margiela copy. However, eventually, Demna kind of had his own lane in fashion, and Demna is at a point now where he has his own distinct aesthetic. He doesn't take inspiration from the same place Margiela takes inspiration from. Demna Gvasalia takes a lot of inspiration from his Eastern European culture, being Georgian, or the Georgian War, for example. That has absolutely nothing to do with Margiela. But at the start of his work, there was a lot of Margiela in his work, which is less so now. And then moving on, the same thing can be said about a great designer of our time right now called Rick Owens. In a live stream I did, someone was talking about how they met Rick Owens, and Rick Owens told him that he's copied other designers to find how he expresses himself in certain ways. And while I can't really verify that information, what I can verify is the fact that Rick Owens is very open about how much his work is influenced by the work of Madeleine Vionnet. And there are aspects of Rick Owens' older work where he does outright copy a lot of design techniques from Vionnet. To quote something that Rick Owens said in a Vogue interview in 2003, when he was describing one of the pieces in his collection, he said, "It's part Levi jacket, part biker jacket, part Madeleine Vionnet." Now, Rick Owens is the perfect example of a fashion designer that has his own design language, he has his own aesthetic. But the building blocks that created this aesthetic was from Rick Owens taking a lot of cues that he liked from multiple different designers. And then he developed these ideas to make something that is originally his. And we can even relate this to many different industries, whether we're talking about business. Businesses use case studies and information from other businesses and similar businesses, and then they take what works and discard what doesn't. Or if we're talking about science, scientists have to use information that they've gotten from the past to inform experiments and things that they do in the future. So for example, if someone who wants to make this amazing light bulb didn't understand what electricity was, they wouldn't be able to make it. However, we understand what electricity is and the science within it because of people that have come before us who have explained that to us. Without those people, we don't know if we would even understand these things today. And the same thing is very common in fashion. A lot of fashion designers look to the past and it informs what they currently do. However, there's a big trope of people that likes to pretend that the famous fashion designer just got their ideas out of the sky and they're the most original person since sliced bread. However, that is just not true. And I think at the end of the day, fashion designers are always pulling inspiration from each other in one way or another. Whether it's the way someone designs, the way someone thinks, the way someone's referenced their culture, or many different aspects of fashion design. And the point of view that Yohji Yamamoto is coming through is this idea that through copying the work of designers that you really love and designers that you are really inspired by, and through understanding their work, then you can translate a lot of the philosophies these designers use into your own design language, which will inherently be very different because you have different lived experiences to the person that you are copying prior. However, having said all this, I think there is always an exception to the rule, and I think here there is one massive exception to the rule. Now, the exception to the rule is the power dynamic in when this happens. So if we look at back in Cristobal Balenciaga's day, when couturiers used to copy other people's work, the thing is, it would always be the up-and-coming designer who copies the big, successful designer. So it's quite easier for Vionnet to look at Balenciaga as like, oh, there's this cool up-and-coming designer that copies me, I'm so flattered. That's a different power dynamic to someone who's already successful, earning millions, copying the work of a creative that is barely struggling to make ends meet, because now you're exploiting someone's ideas in a way where that person is not even helped. So the power dynamic is very different. Going from what Yohji Yamamoto is saying, because what Yohji Yamamoto said it kind of suggests that he's talking about when a designer is at the beginning of their stages, because Yoji says to copy and by the end you will find yourself. That statement does suggest that he's suggesting that you should copy and try to find inspiration in different ways when you're in the earlier part of your career, which is what did happen. You wouldn't really see the opposite happening, where you have a massive designer copying a smaller designer, and times that did happen, that was always frowned upon, but it wasn't very common. So to conclude this video, if you're a fashion designer or if you're in any type of artistic process, there's nothing wrong with copying per se, so long as you understand what you're copying. You can contextualize what you are copying and you actually know the reason behind the work that you are copying. Because through this, instead of copying something at face value, you have an understanding of the reasoning that went behind the work, and then you can take that idea and translate it into you as a person. And eventually, as Yoji says, you will find yourself. But on that note, comment down below your thoughts, because I know this video will definitely split opinions. Like this video if you are new to the channel, subscribe to my channel. And if you want to support my channel financially, you can support the Patreon. It costs $3 a month, and for that you get access to exclusive content, and you can support the work I do. And on that note, I'll be back with another video very soon.